It is no secret that having an elite running back is extremely important for fantasy football, so although it's early, I'm ranking the top 40 running backs in a tier list. If you don't know me, my name is KCLuke. I've been posting fantasy content for over 4 years, worked with all the biggest brands in the space, and even had a meeting with Austin Eckler last year to chat ball, so let's dive right into the sauce. Starting off in the S tier with Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery was just traded to Houston, which is obviously a great thing for Montgomery, but I absolutely hate the Lions' new offensive coordinator, Drew Betzing. If you followed me at all last year, I was screaming in the pillow every time this guy was running plays for the Cardinals. I mean, James Conner was running RPOs when they were down by 17 points in the fourth quarter. It was something that really frustrated me. So I would give a slight downgrade to Amon-Ra, Gibbs, and Jameson Williams, maybe even Goff. But at the end of the day, Gibbs still averaged 27.4 points per game in those 6 games without David Montgomery, and he averaged just 18.2 points per game with David Montgomery healthy, and 21.4 overall points per game in 2025. So obviously saw a big kick up there whenever Montgomery sat, which is obviously a great thing here, as now Montgomery will be gone for the whole season. In 2025, when Dan Campbell took over play calling midseason, the targets jumped from 3.9 per game to 7 per game, so they used him a lot more in the pass game whenever Dan Campbell was calling plays, which I expect him to be doing once again this year. The PPR points per game went from 18.2 to 24.8. Montgomery also took 20 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. Even if Gibbs only absorbs half of those, that's 3 to 4 more points per game, which will be a huge tick up for Gibbs. It was really tough to decide who to pick between Gibbs and Bijan Robinson with Tyler Algier gone. Tyler Algier actually had 8 rushing touchdowns last year, which was more than Bijan Robinson, and I don't even view this as a bad thing. Bijan's a big guy. He's a good goal line back, and I think he can get in the end zone if they gave him the opportunity, but that's actually one of the positive reasons I have jotted down, is because I think Bijan, if he gets in the end zone more often than he did last year, like let's say he had 7 touchdowns last year and he gets those 8 and their backup takes the other half, you're looking at a 13 touchdown season, which for a guy that's already catching a bunch of passes, he had 58 catches in 2024 and 47 in 2023. He could put together a really good PPR season for fantasy, and let's be real, we know how talented this guy is. I don't really have to tell you over and over again, and he's only 24 years old, entering the prime of his career, so I'm not worried about Bijan Robinson at all. I think he's still a top 5 pick easily, and I think you could seriously debate whether him or Gibbs should be the number 1 pick. Closing out the S tier, we have Jonathan Taylor, and it was really a tale of 2 halves for him last year. With Daniel Jones, he put up 24.6 points per game, which was second amongst all RBs. That was from weeks 1 through 13. So obviously with Daniel Jones at quarterback, he was one of the best options in all of fantasy. I remember through the first 8 weeks, it was really him and Puka Nacua for who was the best guy in all of fantasy and who was going to win fantasy MVP. But then unfortunately, Daniel Jones got hurt, and from week 14 on, he only averaged 13.3 PPR points per game. So obviously a bad fall off there, and he could not seem to pull it together with the Colts run at quarterbacks with Phillip Rivers or whoever else, Riley Leonard, who was at the helm. But the good news is that Daniel Jones just signed a 2-year, $88 million contracts to come back to the Colts, and reports are saying that he might be able to play in week 1. So if that could happen, Jonathan Taylor could be a debatable top 3 pick once again. So I'm excited to see if he can rock out. Their O-line is still good, and obviously the talent is still there. Now, the unfortunate thing with S tiers, you might not even get one of those guys based on how low your draft pick is. So here's tier A, some of the guys that you can maybe get in the early 2nd round or maybe late 1st. And the first guy in the A tier is Christian McCaffrey. Now, I know what you're probably going to say, like, how is this guy not number 1 overall? He was a cheat code in fantasy last year. And while I do understand that, this offense is still going to be good, and hypothetically, like, they should be running back the exact same situation, but he's 29 years old, might turn 30 during the season, I don't even know, and old running backs typically fall off around this time. I know Christian McCaffrey's kind of an outlier of a human. He's played just 17 games once in the last 4 seasons. When healthy, he's a cheat code, but I just don't know if he can continuously do it. But like I said, when he's healthy, he's amazing. There have been 9 RB seasons of 24 plus PPR points per game since 2017, and Christian McCaffrey owns 4 of them. And honestly, you could argue that he might be even better this year, as there should be more pass catching upside with no Kittle and maybe no Jawan Jennings. So I don't mind another Christian McCaffrey pick, but I'm just saying if he's a 1st round pick, you don't want to lose your league in the 1st round, and there's a very high chance that he doesn't stay healthy for the full year. But once again, football is a very hostile sport, so there's a chance a lot of these guys don't stay healthy, but this is just my opinion, and you better respect it because it's mine. Next guy up is James Cook, and there's not a lot for this one really. People were expecting a lot of regression after his 2024 season in the touchdown department, but obviously that didn't happen in 2025. He popped off once again, and it turns out that good running backs and good offenses actually just score a lot of touchdowns, so I'm not worried about him at all here. He has a 10.5 touchdown line on Underdog, which is once again very high, and that's similar to the likes of Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor and all of the best guys in that space. So I'm expecting him to get in the end zone a lot once again, and I think he'll be a great pick once again. Obviously, when you're in an offense like the Bills, this will be one of the safest picks in fantasy. Next man up is Devon Achane, and there's a lot of turmoil here. He's getting a new quarterback and a new head coach, which is really scary, and I honestly think it's a downgrade at both positions, unfortunately. Losing Mike McDaniel sucks. He had a top 6 running back over the last 3 years, and it's not even because Achane's talent is so crazy. He did it with Raheem Mostert, who we know was likely dust at that point of his career, and he was the RB2 and had 17 touchdowns. So the talent for Achane is undeniable. He led all 51 running backs in yards per carry, yards after contact per carry, and PFF rushing grade. But the other big thing you have to look at is Malik Willis coming in at quarterback. And obviously Malik Willis will be a decent option for himself. Like being the quarterback of the Dolphins offense and being able to rush and do all the things that he can do will be good. Unfortunately, mobile quarterbacks don't really throw to the running backs a lot, which really sucks for Achane because a lot of his fantasy points last year were made up of receiving upside, which I just don't think he'll have this year. There's also a chance that this offense just isn't very good and he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. So I have him a little down my rankings compared to where ECR has him, but the talent is still undeniable. I'm just not really sure if he can put things together over a full season with all these moving parts over the offseason. Luckily for the Chargers though, Omarion Hampton now gets Mike McDaniel as the offensive coordinator. He only played 10 games last year due to injuries, but the talent was obviously there, and I still think he's the player that they drafted him as. The injuries weren't major. Kamani Vidal was very efficient when he played, and Keaton Mitchell signed, but I think it's just going to be a special teams play, really. I think the main 2 backs in this system will be Hampton and Vidal, and unfortunately, I wish we got a season where we could just watch Hampton completely rock out, but Vidal was amazing for them last year, so I think this will actually be somewhat of a 2 backfield system, with Hampton taking a majority of the work. Obviously, we've seen guys like Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane get it done for multiple seasons in Miami, so I'm not really worried about the coaching change. I actually think it's going to be a massive positive for Hampton. I think he's a dark horse to finish top 5 at the position, maybe even top 3. So let's say you miss out on all these guys and you took a wide receiver early. These are still some guys that you can get in maybe the early 2nd, early 3rd round that can really help you still have a decent RB1 to anchor that position down. Starting off the B tier, we got Ashton Jeanty, and this is going to be a very interesting situation. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza is likely coming in at quarterback, but this offensive line was easily one of the worst in the NFL last year. I would say them and the Texans really showed out as like, man, these guys suck. He averaged 1.6 yards per contact before attempt, which ranked 56th out of 60 qualifying running backs. The offense really gave him nothing. He was 3rd in missed tackles forced per carry, 2nd in yards after contact per carry. The stats don't look good. The advanced metrics look great for Jeanty because he's a beast and he was really good running, but the offensive line just didn't give him anything really. And they signed Tyler Linderbaum as center, which is going to be a big pickup. Shout out Buford if any of you guys have seen that clip from Lamar Jackson. But he's a really good guy in the run game and should shore up the middle of that offensive line and make them much better. But if you want a safer option, Chase Brown has averaged 18 PPR points over his last 25 games. There's not been a lot of guys over the past 2 seasons that have really been better than him. Once Zach Moss went down 2 years ago, this guy stepped up and he's been one of the best running backs in the NFL for fantasy, especially pass catching. That's his real upside. He's a 3-down back in an offense that passes more than almost anyone, and he has a great connection with Joe Burrow, which we've seen for other fantasy assets has been amazing. They didn't sign any RBs in free agency. We'll have to wait and see after the draft because I could very well see them taking an early down thumper and having Chase Brown as more of a dynamic role where he plays on 3rd downs and most of early downs, but they kind of work more guys in because he doesn't really have a workhorse profile, and that's what he's been doing over the last 2 years. So I could see them drafting another guy to try to keep him healthy. But overall, Chase Brown is another great pick. I don't see many ways you can go wrong with him after what he's done the last 2 seasons. This one could come back to bite me, but Saquon Barkley had one of the most polarizing 2025 seasons I had ever seen. After finishing as the RB1 in 2024 and winning everyone's league pretty much, the offensive line completely fell off a cliff. His yards before contact dropped from 3.8 in 2024 to 2.5, and if you know anything about football, that's not an RB stat, that's an offensive line stat. Lane Johnson is entering his age 35 season, and Cam Jurgens had offseason back surgery. This offensive line is slowly falling apart, and although they have great management, I believe in Howie Roseman, and I think he could put some guys together up there on the Philly O-line that can really make them better and improve from last season to this season, but I don't know. We'll have to see with Barkley. Jalen Hurts averaged a career low 5.6 rushing fantasy points per game in 2025, but his rushing TD line is still 10.5 on Underdog, which is what really scares me because Barkley's goal line upside is capped by Hurts vulturing touchdowns, but both at 10.5 means that this offense is projected to be very good, so I still think there's room for both of them to eat. I'm going to be a huge fan of Josh Jacobs this year. I can already tell. I think that knee injury really set him back last season, and it wasn't completely his fault. But before the injury, from weeks 1 through 10, he was 6th in PPR points per game, 3rd in expected points per game, and he was averaging over 20 touches per game. Post week 11, which was after the knee injury, he missed week 12 and then was kind of in and out of the lineup, and you saw that one game in the fantasy playoffs where he absolutely screwed everyone over, got like 2 carries and just sat the rest of the game because they had clinched the playoffs and he was hurt. So So the real thing to note there is he was the RB6 from week 10 on, which is something that really intrigues me because I think if he can put together a full healthy season, he's just never going to be a bad pick, and he's never going to finish out of the top 12 running backs, and you could probably get him in the middle of the 3rd round these days. So that for a guy who, if he plays the whole season, will be an RB1 is super, super valuable. The one thing I will say that does kind of concern me is he's 28 years old, and the amount of carries he's gotten over his time in Las Vegas and Green Bay is a lot. So I could see those injuries continuing to be a problem, but if he stays healthy, I love him once again for fantasy. Kicking off the C tier, we got Kenneth Walker, and he just moved over to the Kansas City Chiefs after a long tenure with the Seattle Seahawks. Probably a good thing. Zach Charbonnet was absolutely infuriating me over the second half of last year when Kenneth Walker would walk it up the whole field and then he would just get the goal line carry and score. So I'm glad he's with the Chiefs now, but his underdog lines are a little bit concerning. He only has a 925.5 rush yards total and an 8.5 touchdowns total, which you would have liked to see those over 1,010 just because he's going to one of the best offenses in the NFL. So clearly the books are projecting this to be a committee between him and probably Amari DiMercato, who the Chiefs just signed. The landing spot was good, and it's better than a lot of the other landing spots. Like, the Chiefs are one of the best I can think of. They'll probably have one of the highest team totals out of every team that he could have gone to. I'm just not sure he can be a workhorse back at this point of his career because he's never really stayed healthy, and this might be slightly overrated due to last year's playoff run because he was the RB22 last year, which really isn't that good, but I still like him at the top of C tier. I still think he'll be a decent option. It just depends on where you get him in drafts. And heading to the next guy, Jeremiah Love, the consensus 101 in rookie drafts. It's really just going to come down to landing spot. I hate doing this before the NFL draft because we don't know where everyone's ended up, but the best fantasy outcomes are a team with a good O-line and no established starter, obviously. So maybe like the Cardinals, if they ever wanted to take a swing. I actually think the Giants might be looking at him, which is crazy. That RB combo of Cam Scatterbo and Jeremiah Love would be sick. So you'll just have to see where he ends up, and I'll make another video post-draft to update this and give you my full ranking on whenever he finally gets a landing spot. Derrick Henry is 32 and he might be turning 33 in the middle of the NFL seasons. I really don't know what his birthday is, but he still has a 12.5 rushing TD line on Underdog. Now, obviously this is a bit skewed. If you're in a PPR league, he doesn't catch any passes, but Derrick Henry just doesn't go away, man. And I understand the age argument, but at what point are you not going to understand that this guy's just an outlier of a human being? Of course, he's an outlier with his age as well. The Ravens ran 57.3 plays per game last year, which ranked 29th, and I really just don't expect that to keep happening with how good of an offense they have. And the one problem with Derrick Henry is whenever they're losing, he doesn't stay on the field very much. It's Justice Hill time. Last year was Keaton Mitchell time. Obviously, he went to the Chargers, so it'll probably be a lot of Justice Hill if they're losing. I just don't really expect that to be happening again. Last year was a weird year where Lamar Jackson was hurt for quite a bit of the season, so if they're up in games, it's going to be him toting the rock, and I think he'll be great once again. He has over a 1,200-yard rushing line on Underdog as well. Bucky Swervin' Irvin is finishing out our C tier. First 4 weeks when he was healthy, he was averaging just over 15 points per game, and after the return from injury, just 10 points per game. This is a classic thing you'll see from a lot of running backs. Whenever your guy gets injured in fantasy, it kind of sucks because they're really not the same player that you drafted him as, and that's held true with a lot of guys. We saw with Josh Jacobs and now Bucky Irving. He didn't get a single carry inside the 5-yard line last year. Something that is very worrying, to say the least, going forward. I guess Rashawn White is gone now. He's in Washington, but Sean Tucker is still there, and we know that Todd Bowles has a man crush on Sean Tucker, so that will probably continue to happen. And also, they signed Kenneth Gainwell in free agency, which is not something you love to see. I wish we would have got to see Bucky ball out for a complete season, but I just don't think that's going to happen again this year. Zach Robinson did say he sees him in a very similar light to Bijan Robinson, but I like to trust the moves themselves rather than coach speak, and signing Kenneth Gainwell is not something you love to see. It'll probably be a committee once again, and if it's a committee and an offense that just lost Mike Evans, I don't really know how good they're going to be. Probably about average once again. I still think he's okay, but obviously a huge downgrade from the second round pick that everyone was taking him as last year. Tier D, and we are zooming through this list, but Breece Hall is kicking off Tier D, and he's still on the Jets, one of the worst offenses in football. I'm really hoping he holds out and ends up getting traded or moving to another landing spot because I hate watching a dude this talented stay in New York, and I don't think Geno Smith is going to fix that. Talent is top 5 at the position, but situation is bottom 5. He's only had 18 rushing touchdowns in 4 seasons with the Jets, which sucks because rushing touchdowns, as you know, aren't really a factor of the running back for the most part. It's usually the factor of the offense. And like I said, Geno Smith coming in was just atrocious for the Raiders. I know his offensive line was bad, but they're probably not going to be much better in New York. So I'm just really not confident in this situation at all. Really sucks. I hope Breece Hall gets traded someday and can actually ball out and be a monster running back for whatever team he goes to because he really deserves it. Moving on, our next guy in the D tier, Kyron Williams, who was a workhorse workhorse from weeks 1 through 11, and then a guy named Blake Corum stepped in from weeks 12 through 18 and completely killed his fantasy season. He was the RB16 from week 12 on and saw his snap share drop to 54%, which is something you hate to see if you were his owner because it kind of completely blindsided you. They just woke up one day and they're like, hey, Blake Corum, you're good at football now. We want to give you some touches. So he still finishes the RB9 overall for the season, which is really good. That offense is still amazing. They were the #1 offense in the NFL last year, and I think he'll still be okay because he's still going to get a bunch of goal line carries and probably catch some passes and maybe have some big breakaway plays because the offense is so good. But I don't really know if Blake Corum is still there. They're probably going to feed him just like they did at the end of last season. And he was the RB16. I have him ranked about the RB17, so I think this is a pretty fair ranking. Moving on, Travis Etienne signed with the New Orleans Saints, got an absolute bag. Kind of love to see it for a guy like Etienne. He was kind of written off after his first year in Jacksonville. Him and Trevor Lawrence didn't have quite the chemistry that everyone thought they would. And then this year, obviously, balled out together. A lot of people said he fell off over the second half of last season, but we kind of just know that that was Trevor Lawrence dropping his dick on the field and being amazing. So I'm not really worried about the talent whatsoever. And I actually think the Saints offense might be sneaky good with Tyler Shuck. They averaged 20 points per game and 343 passing yards per game over the second half of last season, weeks 9 through 18, that is, when Spencer Rattler got benched. Kellen Moore's offense is consistently ranked top 4 in pace. And I mean, he coached Saquon Barkley, obviously. He's had some good running backs at the helm. And one thing also to note is Alvin Kamara was dead last among qualifying RBs in both PFF rushing and receiving grade in 2025. He's kind of cooked as a player, in my opinion. The weird thing is he's been a pass catching back for all of his career, and they didn't even use him in the pass catching role last season. So I think there's a good chance he probably gets released and they just roll with Kendre Miller, Travis Etienne, and Devin Neal. I'm kind of a fan of Etienne here. I think this will be a sneaky good offense with Tyler Shuck. If Shuck ends up developing and even taking that next step into maybe being a good quarterback, let's say like top 10, I think Etienne will be a huge part of that and be a huge benefactor and score a lot of touchdowns. But closing out the D tier, we got Javonte Williams, who was probably the biggest surprise in all of fantasy last year. After the first game, I think everyone kind of knew, like once we saw that he was going to be the workhorse in the Cowboys offense, we were like, all right, yeah, this guy's going to be legit. And he just re-signed with Dallas, so I'm excited for that. Schottenheimer constantly has these boys moving very fast. They finished top 4 in plays per game for 3 straight years. Probably going to continue once again. Now, this is a very pass-heavy offense, obviously, with George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, but once again, that could be a good thing for Javonte. He was good in the passing game as well last year, so I think he'll be okay once again. Finished as the RB12 in points per game, and so like an RB1 for a guy you took at the end of last season's draft is not bad whatsoever. And what shocked me is that he's still 25 years old. Like, I thought this guy was kind of dust at this point, but he's not. He's just had a couple of really bad injuries, but obviously, as you saw last year, he looked amazing. So I'm not really worried about him once again, and I think he'll be a great option as an RB2. Now we get into tier E, and we got some guys that have some glaring problems, but I think they'll still be great flex plays and could even fill in as an RB2 if you need him. Starting off with Cam Scatabo, I don't think people realize how good this guy was before injury last year. He averaged 16 PPR points per game, and the RPO with Jackson Dart could be absolutely lethal. We just saw Derrick Henry absolutely eat in the same RPO scheme, so I think could be really good for Scatabo once again. Obviously still young, still in the prime of his career. The ankle injury is a bit concerning, but it wasn't an Achilles or an ACL tear, so I'm not super worried about being a long-term issue. So I think if you fire up Scatabo once again as an RB2, he'll be a great option if he can stay healthy, as long as his brain isn't mush by the end of the season with CTE, you know what I'm saying? Moving on, we got Quinshon Judkins. Now, the O-line absolutely sucked last year, and this is what you can expect from Quinshon Judkins. He's going to get a ton of volume in probably one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Still don't know who their quarterback is. There's a chance it's Shadur Sanders. There's a chance it's Dylan Gabriel. We don't really know, but one thing I do know is that they're probably going to be pretty bad, and he'll have a safe floor, but the upside is super capped for sure, because I don't know how many touchdowns this offense is realistically going to be scoring, so just keep an eye out on that if you need an RB2 flex play. I don't think he'll be a terrible option, but not a guy I'm really actively targeting in my drafts, if that makes sense. DeAndre Swift was pretty solid last year, and I told all of you to draft him, by the way, so keep that in mind, but the bottleneck is obviously Kyle Monangai. This is going to be a 60-40 or 55-45 split at the end of the day. Monangai was very good when he got his touches, and one thing to note here is Drew Dahlman also surprisingly retired. He was only 27, I believe, which really sucks for the Bears because he was an all-pro and one of the big staples of this offensive line, so he'll be gone. There's a chance that their offensive line regresses a lot because of that, and one thing I just hate about guys like this is, like, you're not going to know who to start every week. It's going to be a good matchup and Monangai's going to score 2 touchdowns, and then you're not going to really know, well, next week it's going to be a tough matchup and you're going to be like, do I start this guy? But you don't, and then he pops off for 2 touchdowns. Like, it's just going to be tough every single week to decide whether to start him or not, and I just don't really like that on my fantasy team, so I'll probably be staying away from Swift unless I can get him at value, but it's just not a guy I'm super enticed with and the guy that I want to target. Starting off tier F, this is the committee tier. Basically, all of these guys are in a committee, so I'm going to run through them. J.K. Dobbins before injury was actually very good. He was averaging 5 yards per carry, but he's never played a full season, and it's now really racking up the injury history. He has an Achilles tear, he has an ACL tear, he has a Liz Frank injury. So a lot of stuff to be worried about here. And now you can't really get RJ Harvey as the handcuff. You have to draft him early if you want to get him. So that's kind of cooked once again. Travion Henderson was very good when he got the touches last year, but unfortunately he entered the Mike Vrabel doghouse, which is insanely hard to break out of, and he barely played in the playoffs, which was super surprising to me because he had that run where he was popping off long runs, and when Ramondre was hurt, he looked juiced up, and I thought he was going to take over the backfield for the rest of the season, but it just didn't end up happening. He was very solid when Ramondre sat, but this will likely be a tough decision every week to start him or sit him, and you don't really know, and there's also a chance that you take him in like the 5th, 6th round, and Ramondre is just the starter for the whole year, and you never really bench him, and you're like, why did I just pick this guy? That was an awful pick. So I love the talent with Travion Henderson. I'm hoping he can break out of that doghouse, but if he can't, then it's just not a guy you're going to want on your fantasy team. Moving on with RJ Harvey, with J.K. Dobbins last year, averaged 10 PPR points per game. Without Dobbins, he averaged 15.5 PPR points per game. So it was really good over the second half of the season. Even had some 20-point games around the fantasy playoffs. So I believe in RJ Harvey as a player. I think he's solid. He looked pretty good for the Broncos last year whenever they needed him. He was catching some long touchdown passes, and I think he'll definitely be a really good third down back, but re-signing J.K. Dobbins, it's tough to believe he's ever going to achieve a workhorse role. Dobbins is really good when he plays, and we saw even when he went down, they like to use Jaleel McLaughlin on early down runs and short yardage carries, so we'll just have to see how that works out, but I'm not really sure that Harvey is a guy that I really want to invest a lot of stock into, if I'm being honest with you. And that's all I can do. All I can do is be honest with you. Moving on to Chuba Hubbard, who could be pretty enticing this year now with Rico Dowdle in Pittsburgh. Jonathan Brooks is going to be back this year, and it's going to be interesting to see how they use him. Obviously, he was a first-round pick 2 years ago, but he's tore his ACL back-to-back seasons, which is ridiculous. Like that's super tough for anyone to come back from, but he's young enough, and I think he has enough juice to come back from it and be okay. If anything, he'll probably be a third down back and still get a lot of the third down work and take away pass-catching opportunities from Hubbard, which would suck. But at the same time, Chuba Hubbard got paid, which is super important for fantasy. Whichever guy gets paid usually gets more carries. So if he's the first and second down back in this offense, I don't absolutely hate him. I have him ranked like 8 or 9 spots above ECR, which is massive. So just keep your eye on how he moves up and down draft boards throughout the offseason. But I really don't mind this guy one bit at his current price. I would actually be targeting him in a lot of your leagues if you can. Jaylen Warren is a guy that the Steelers absolutely love. They signed Rico Dowdle, which sucks because I want to see Warren rock out on his own team. And this becomes another committee where you're like, who am I starting every week? Who's got the backfield this week? Who's taking the goal line carries? So Rico Dowdle is also a very good runner. He has back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, like you've heard me say multiple times, and he's proven that he can take over a backfield if he wants to. If he has a couple of those pop games that he had last year in Carolina, this backfield could be gone from Warren, but I still think this is going to be a committee with Warren taking some of the early down work, splitting that with Dowdle, and then getting the third down work as well. We'll just see. I'm not even sure that this Steelers offense is really going to be that good at all anymore anyways. We don't know who their quarterback is, and I don't think Aaron Rodgers is returning for another season, so not super high on the Steelers as a whole of an offense. But moving on to David Montgomery, just got traded to Houston, probably going to be in a committee with Woody Marks, but Woody Marks was atrocious last year. He was 46th in yards per carry, 34th rush yards over expectations, and 46th in yards after contact among the 51 RBs. And I don't necessarily think this is a stat about Woody Marks. I think he's an okay player. I think this is a stat about the Texans O-line, who has been absolutely atrocious. Last year, I can't even imagine what that Texans D-line does to their O-line in training camp. Like, it's probably the best D-line in the NFL versus the worst offensive line, so they probably just get smashed. But yeah, not super high on either of these guys, really, because I'm not sure how good this offense is even going to be, really, because CJ Stroud, obviously, like, not the best quarterback like we saw in the playoffs, and they really weren't that good of a regular season offense. Their defense kind of carried them. So besides Nico Collins, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily targeting a lot of these guys in my drafts. But moving on, we got Rico Dowdle, just signed with Pittsburgh in a committee with Jaylen Warren, like we said. Back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher. I think this is a way better IRL signing than for fantasy. Like I said, like I hate predicting who's going to be the guy in the committee every week, and I'll probably just stay away from this backfield if I can. But at the end of the day, both of these guys will be high-value handcuffs. If you can get either of them later in your drafts, if they fall and one of these guys goes down, the other will probably be a top 15 RB for the rest of the season. So something to keep an eye on there. Tony Pollard has been super underrated down there in Tennessee, finishes the RB 23 in PPR leagues, and this Titans offense could be better with Brian Dable, to be honest. They got him coming down. They got Wan'Dale Robinson coming down. Tajay Spears is still there to limit his upside a little bit, but they've proven that they want to give Pollard the workload whenever he's healthy, and they paid him a lot of money a couple years ago, so I could see him being fine once again. He's never going to be a guy that you are confident putting in your lineup every single week as a guy that's going to pop off, but he was the RB 23 in PPR points last year, was similarly good the year before, and I think he could be a fine RB2 once again. Now entering the G tier, we got Ramondre Stevenson. I already hit on this a little bit before with Trevion Henderson. This is going to be another one of those situations where it's going to be a committee, and the New England offense was elite in 2025, and I'm not really sure they can repeat that once again. They're going to have a way tougher schedule this year than they did last year, and they kind of proved in the playoffs there were some holes to their offensive game plan, and once teams see that, it can be kind of spooky. Hence CJ Stroud, who we just talked about in the last section with David Montgomery and Woody Marks. Once teams figure you out, it's kind of tough to keep progressing and get better and build off what you were last season. So if you're in a committee with an offense that regresses, it's very tough. We also got Kyle Monangai, who will still get work, but is the clear RB2 in that backfield. His ceiling is very limited as a committee back on this bad offense, and to be honest, the Bears could fall victim to the same thing as the New England Patriots, where teams get film on them and they regress heavily from year 1 to year 2. But I like Ben Johnson, so I think he'll continue to be okay for them, and they'll still have a top 12 offense, I would say. Bashal Tutin is now the RB1 in Jacksonville after Travis Etienne's departure, which is kind of ridiculous that he's the RB1, but this is going to be a committee with Chris Rodriguez and LaQuint Allen taking the passing work. The early down guys, it's going to be Chris Rodriguez probably taking the first snaps if I had to guess. Maybe him and Bashal will alternate drives, which is another thing that I could really see them doing. Whichever one of these guys goes later in drafts is the guy that I'm going to want. You'll just have to monitor the rankings and see where those guys go, but they also paid Chris Rodriguez $6 million a year, which is something to note because that's quite a bit of money for a running back. So none of these guys are going to be a true bell cow, but they're going to get some carries, and some carries in this offense is going to be valuable because the Jaguars have a very good offense. Now moving on, we got Blake Corum, and Sean McVay has openly said that they want to keep Williams fresh by using Corum more, and that was very evident over the second half of last year from week 12 on. He's also an elite handcuff. If Kyren Williams were to go down, this guy would probably be a top 5 running back. Because the RB1 and one of the best offenses in the NFL is super valuable. Fine with Blake Corum, but obviously like a guy you're taking later on in your draft. He's probably never going to see your lineup unless Kyren Williams goes down. Moving on, we got Aaron Jones Sr. This is going to be a committee with Jordan Mason. I'm not really sure how good this offense is going to be. I love Kevin O'Connell and I want to believe in him, but it's just kind of tough to believe after what I saw last year. But they got Kyler Murray at quarterback, so maybe this could be slightly better. And who knows? Kyler Murray is an okay quarterback despite all the shit that people give him. He's not bad. He's not terrible. Not as bad as JJ McCarthy. Maybe he could lead them to a middle of the pack offense and Jones could have some value, but likely guys I'm not really going to be targeting. Moving on to the H tier, most of these guys are absolute dust, but we're going to go over them because they could still have some value at the end of your drafts. James Conner, turning 31, coming off an ACL tear. The Cardinals signed Tyler Algier, which signals a committee approach. Even when he's healthy, his best days are behind him. He's been in the league forever at this point, and even when he was in his prime, I thought he was kind of dust with Pittsburgh, and even in his early years in Arizona. So definitely a guy I'm not going to be targeting. An ACL to this late in your career is a guy that you should never be targeting in your drafts, especially from the running back position where it's super important when you're cutting and doing all that shit. So yeah, James Conner, not a guy I'm really going to want. Tyler Algier, same thing. Tyler Algier's a fat dude, so he'll probably take some pass blocking snaps away from James Conner, but he also can't catch the ball. So it's one of those things that's like a double negative. And he's also had 737 consecutive touches without a fumble. Definitely something to note, because if a guy in a committee fumbles and then the other guy just comes in and doesn't, like sometimes it's a mix of who can't mess up the most. So maybe Tyler Algier can work out a multi-week role there if he can hold on to the ball. Going on, we got Woody Marks. This is going to be a committee with David Montgomery. Like I said, he sucked last year when he got the touches, but he was getting a ton of them, and it wasn't necessarily his fault. The Texans O-line is just absolute garbage. They're still a work in progress, still not very good, and I didn't see them very active in the O-line market in free agency, so that is something that's should be very worrisome for CJ Stroud and the running backs. I mean, it's hard to trust in fantasy. it's going to be tough to start him this year. He'll really only have value if David Montgomery goes down. And even if that does occur, it wouldn't surprise me if they went to a committee with Jawar Jordan, who was decent for them at the end of last year. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, the Commanders signed Rachaad White, which is one of the most least exciting signings of the offseason. He's kind of a cone, but he's a guy that's just in there that will take pass catching work and take early down work. So this will likely be a committee up there in Washington. And the 2025 hype was way too high. Everyone that bought his merch is in absolute shambles right now because this dude is going to be probably a backup running back for the best of his career, and bunch of dudes are running around with his sweatshirt on. But hey, respect, give respect as it is. I can't hate on you. Could still have a role, but the ceiling is going to be severely capped with Rachaad White there. And even if he went down, it wouldn't surprise me if they made another committee like they did last year with Chris Rodriguez. Tyrone Tracy is going to end out our list. Sat behind Cam Scatabo all last season. He has a limited path to being good for fantasy, but who knows? Tracy's been good before when he's got the touches, so maybe he can do it again if Scatabo goes down, but it wouldn't surprise me if they made that a committee as well. If you stuck around until the end of the video, thank you so much. You learned something about fantasy football, even if you think I'm an idiot. Make sure you like and subscribe for more videos coming soon.